The original question, I think, was about whether you were familiar with the place. It's probably Italy is probably the only place that I've gone to repeatedly, and I do feel any sense of familiarity with. But always, when you go somewhere, especially if you go somewhere repeatedly and you become familiar, there's also the sense of the unfamiliarity as well. You know, the fact that you feel quite at home there, but actually you're not really. Because you're not from there and you don't live there all the time. And I wanted to take a character that had never been there and take them there, but also the idea that somebody's going there to work for a while, not just to be on holiday there, and taking them out of the environment. And of course there's also a lot of links between, you know, Italy and Glasgow, because, you know, one of the guys, the other decorator, Bobby, is of course really Roberto, because his granny had, you know, his mother's parents were Italian, and of course that's really, really common in Glasgow, that whole link with Italy. So I suppose. Yeah.
And the experience of being in Italy challenges all the assumptions that he goes out with. That it's going to be sloppy workmanship.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's one of the brother. He's always going, oh, this is going to be brilliant. It's going to be just lying around having siestas all day and all this kind of thing. And actually, people work so hard and are so meticulous about everything. So it was, you know, things like that as well. But also the idea of in the last section about the sea, because it's right down to the physicality of it. Because we also, you know, the sea is something that, you know, you think about it, it's as if water links everything up, links all countries up. So if you stand at a sea, it's almost like part of everything, but there's something different about a Scottish sea and an Italian, you know, beach and all those kinds of things. So I was just trying to get beyond that kind of obvious, I suppose.
How does a commission like this, I mean, and how you've chosen to write about it, I'd love to hear how it relates, or how you think it relates to the rest of your work.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, go
on. I think this particular story, not necessarily the commission, but this particular story does relate to the novel that I wrote. I wrote a novel about a sort of domineering father set in South Africa, among other things. At the time, I was exploring when I was going to write when I was going to write the novel. I had a collection of short stories, and I was sure I was going to write a collection of short stories. And when I began to look at the stories, I began to see that, in fact, certain things kept cropping up. I kept having a family of 4 going through very similar kind of problems. So when I changed the names and looked at the themes and pulled those out, I realized that I could have 5 or 6 or 7 chapters of a novel. So I, in a sense, started my novel in the center and then spiraled my way out and made it work from there. And this was one of those stories that I was using, but it didn't really fit with a sort of family theme, but it had that sort of horrible male character that you meet in the story, that is partly to do with the main character in my novel, the father character, but also that conflict with, there's 2 men having a talk at the bar in the story that I wrote. And the conflict is there's no good man and bad man. The young man feels just as sort of corrupted, or he sort of projects the corruption on the older man, but in fact he feels a lot of those urges himself, or he feels complicit, or there's not a clear boundary with that. And that relationship I explore a bit more in my novel. So it so happens that these 2 do fit quite well. And it's good to be able to use it, because this story got jettisoned a few years ago, so it's back.
This is actually very, very different from everything else I've written. There's a lot less sex and swearing in it, for a start. My grandma's in the audience. Hi, Grandma. Sorry about that. I think because when I first started writing this idea, I wanted to write it as a horror story that was in somebody's head. That really the horror and the atrocity that had already happened would always be worse than anything she could imagine, raised on a sort of pop culture diet. so I started, I went and read some horror short stories, which is, that's an entirely new area for me, and I started researching Serbian horror traditions and things. But I think I was approaching this much more timidly, because it's not my own identity, it's not my own country to fling around however I want, really. I felt that, there needed to be a certain amount of, I'm not sure actually, just because there was one extra remove, it just felt that you needed to keep that there. I checked it. I had a couple of Serbian friends that I met over there check it through before I sent it off, because I didn't want to offend anybody inadvertently. So, yeah.
Did it feel liberating to do that then, to do something different?
Yes, it did. It did. It certainly kind of expanded the sort of collection of zombie stories and novels that I've got on my own computer.
The liberation of less.
Yes.
I think a lot of my writing, it's funny because I went to see Jeanette Winterson at this book festival the other day, and she was saying that there is always a mother figure in all her books. She can't help it just creeps in. And I think certain things, even though you try your best to keep them out, always creep into the story. But I think, a lot of my fiction writing is about communication breakdown, and so in that sense, having two characters from different countries who come from different languages, there's your conflict right there, and there's your communication breakdown.
Well, the main characters obviously are, for those of you who are familiar with Buddha Darling, are some of the characters out of that book, so obviously there's a fairly obvious link. When I finished that, I remember being surprised, because some people asked me if I was ever going to write a sequel, and I thought, you can be silly, that's it, it's done, it's finished. And then a wee while ago, well, maybe over a year ago now, I kept wondering about them. I started kind of imagining what might they be like now, sort of 10 years down the line, what would have happened to them. And also just, certain situations that were set up, how would things have developed? So I did actually start to write some things about them, not really sure if it would ever work out or not. And in a way, this commission was an opportunity to look, I suppose, at something that might possibly have happened to them, or to some of them anyway. So I think there's a pretty obvious link in my case with some of the rest of my work.
Are you saying the Commission's responsible for a sequel?
Yes, will there be a sequel?
No, I don't know. I'm not saying that I'm responsible for a sequel, because I'd already started writing some stuff about them anyway. It was just when this came up, the whole idea of sending Jimmy off there it just kind of fitted. I think I don't know whether there'll be a sequel or not. It just depends. I never know if anything's going to work out. But I've written some other stuff about them. I never actually call this a story. Actually, I was quite surprised when it came in, and it was said as a story, because they said we could write anything as long as it was prose, so it could be non-fiction or whatever. And I said it will be fiction, because I don't do non-fiction. But I never really thought of it as a story. I thought of it more of a kind of a piece, really, some kind of extract, not totally complete in itself. It's complete in itself that you could read the section, but I always felt, well, maybe there would need to be more somehow, but whether that'll ever work out or not, I have no idea.